Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
On my 40th birthday, my husband handed me a gym membership and said, with a smirk so faint you'd miss it if you weren't already exhausted from 2 decades of decoding his condescension, you should start caring again. I laughed a little, not because it was funny, but because I knew if I didn't, I might just flip the kitchen island over with my bare hands. I smiled politely, said thank you, and tucked the envelope next to my plate like it was a love letter instead of a slap in the face wrapped in a ribbon. He didn't even write a card. Not a sticky note. Not a post-it. Not a joke. Just the printed invoice from Flexhouse 24/7 Gym, slapped inside a white envelope like that alone would redeem the whole year of forgetting my name half the time unless it was followed by, "Can you grab me a beer?" or, "Did you schedule my dentist appointment?" I think the last time he said, "Laura," like he remembered who I actually was, we were still renting that shitty apartment with the squeaky floors and no dishwasher. We were poor, but at least he noticed me back then. So there I was, 40 years old, a mother of two, freelance book editor working nights while the house slept, and my husband of 16 years had decided my birthday was the day to remind me I was no longer desirable in his eyes. Not through words, of course, he rarely used those anymore, but through actions, calculated and cold like everything else he did these days. And it's not like this was sudden either. I wish I could say this was the first offense. That would have been easier to swallow. But no, this had been coming for years. Death by 1,000 cuts, and the blade was always dull, just enough to bleed, but never deep enough to scream. It started with the way he'd stay later and later at work without a real reason. Then the backhanded comments. "You used to laugh more. You should do something for yourself, you know? You've kind of let yourself go, haven't you?" He would say those things like he was helping. Like he was the good guy pointing out the spinach in your teeth before a job interview. But it wasn't helpful. It was cruel, and worse, it was deliberate. He wanted me to feel small, like I owed him something. Like being a wife and mom wasn't enough, like I had to earn the right to be seen again. Meanwhile, he stayed the same, still wearing the same 3 colognes he's had since college, still getting the same stupid haircut, still leaving his dishes in the sink and expecting praise when he remembered our kids' birthdays. I opened the gym envelope again after he left for work that morning, just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Nope. There it was, 1 year paid in full, starting immediately. No personal trainer, no note, just a subscription and a printed coupon for a complimentary protein shake. The shake might have been the most personal part of the whole damn thing. That afternoon, I went into our shared office and opened my laptop, clicked on a folder buried inside 3 layers of other folders, one I'd titled Operation Freedom, a little over 9 months ago. At first, it was just a joke. I made it after our anniversary dinner last year when he took a client out to golf and told me he thought we agreed not to do gifts this year. I hadn't agreed. I'd spent the day cooking that ridiculous Coke au vin recipe from Julia Child and shaved my legs in both directions like I was 25 again, and he didn't even show up on time. I opened the folder that night while crying into my wine and called it Operation Freedom because how not to lose your mind while married to an asshole felt too long. But the folder became something more. Notes, screenshots, budget spreadsheets, divorce lawyer links. I had spreadsheets labeled Life Without Mike, color-coded tabs for child custody laws by state, and an Excel document titled, Get Out While You Still Can. Over the last year, every time he forgot something important, made a snide comment, or took a passive dig at my body, I added another detail to the plan. It wasn't an if anymore, it was a when. Still, I hadn't acted. Until that birthday morning. That gym membership, that stupid envelope, was the final nudge I didn't know I was waiting for. I wasn't angry. Not in the way you'd expect. I felt detached. Like the part of me that cared had finally died, and in its place was someone a hell of a lot smarter and colder and calmer than I'd ever known myself to be. When he came home that night, he asked how my birthday had been, and I said, lovely. I told him I'd made plans to check out the gym on Saturday, and he nodded like he was proud of me. Like he'd done me a favor. I asked him if he wanted anything for dinner, And he said, "Just whatever." That was always his answer. After he went to bed, I stayed up late organizing files, triple-checking routing numbers, contacting the property manager for a month-to-month lease on a furnished apartment downtown. I ordered a prepaid phone, emailed the lawyer I'd spoken to twice before but never hired, and booked a storage unit under my maiden name. I labeled a new document, D-Day, T-4 days. It was strange how easy it all came together when I finally stopped trying to save something that had been dead for years. Maybe that's the saddest part, that it didn't hurt anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I planned. And when I closed the folder that night, for the first time in a long time, I felt a kind of peace that scared me. The kind that meant this time, I wasn't bluffing. This time, I wasn't waiting for him to change. I was done pretending. He didn't know it yet, but in 4 days, he'd walk into our home expecting dinner and find a lawyer waiting in the kitchen instead. The first morning after my birthday, I got up earlier than usual and made coffee before Mike even stepped out of the shower, humming to myself like a woman who had suddenly discovered her new lease on life. And I could practically feel his smug satisfaction radiating off his barely shaven jawline when he saw me tying my sneakers. I said, "I think I'll check out the gym today," and he said, "That's the spirit," with a stupid little clap of his hands like I was a child trying out ballet class for the first time instead of a grown woman biting her tongue so hard she tasted blood. I drove to Flex House, scanned the barcode on the card he gave me, walked around for 15 minutes like I was new to the planet and the concept of gym equipment, and then took a picture in front of the squat rack with a carefully angled mirror behind me. In the caption I wrote, "Thank you to my thoughtful husband for helping me start fresh," and I swear to God, he shared it on Facebook like he was Father of the Year. While I waited for my smoothie, because yes, I did get that free protein shake, and I sipped it slow out of spite, I opened my email and clicked on the thread I'd been quietly nurturing for the last 9 weeks with a lawyer named Julia Brotherton, whose profile picture on her website showed her in a blood-red suit and eyes that looked like she'd never lost a case out of sheer boredom with men's bullshit. I scheduled the in-person consultation for Thursday at noon, and I made a note to leave an hour early to avoid traffic, not because I needed to, but because the longer I was out of the house, the less likely I'd snap and say something that would blow this whole plan to hell. At home, I started the slow bleed from our joint checking account to an online savings account I had opened 3 months ago under my own name, linked to a new debit card hidden inside the spine of an old copy of Pride and Prejudice on the bookshelf Mike hadn't touched in years. I moved just under the daily transfer limit each time, small enough not to trigger alerts, just big enough that I'd have a decent cushion within 10 days. That gave me roughly $1,000. Wait, no, if I was doing $100 a day for 52 weeks, well, that would be about 3.5 months, give or take. Right? I didn't tell the boys anything yet. Ethan and Ryan were both still in school, and I didn't want them caught in the crossfire until I had the logistics fully nailed down. But Ethan, being 17 and about as subtle as a magnifying glass in sunlight, noticed me hauling boxes into the garage and raised an eyebrow when I told him I was just organizing holiday stuff. He followed me one night while I was hauling a stack of sweaters I hadn't worn in years into the back seat of the car and said, "Mom, are you moving out or something?" I froze for a second, because even when you're mentally prepared, nothing really prepares you for your own kid asking a question like that with the kind of fear in their voice that no teenager should carry. I smiled and lied to his face, something I never wanted to do but had to, and said, "No, honey, just cleaning things up before spring break." He didn't press, just nodded, and I think maybe a part of him didn't want the answer to be yes. But another part of him probably already knew. That night, after they all went to bed, I started packing the important stuff: birth certificates, the boys' immunization records, tax returns. That one USB drive Mike didn't know I'd cloned off his laptop back when I was still naive enough to believe he was hiding porn and not financial documents he didn't want me to see. I printed out the rental agreement for the apartment downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it was furnished and close to the light rail, and, more importantly, it was mine. On Wednesday, I went through the filing cabinet in Mike's office to grab the last 3 years of tax forms, pretending I was gathering documents for FAFSA. It was late, and I was hoping to do it quietly, quickly, without making a mess. But as I tugged open the second drawer, the one I always assumed just held manuals for his old electronics, I found something that stopped me cold. It was a cheap-looking black phone, the kind you buy from a gas station or a sketchy electronics kiosk at the mall. A burner. It was powered off, but curiosity got the best of me and I turned it on. It lit up with 5 missed messages. The name on the screen was Sabrina, followed by a single red rose emoji. I didn't even know he knew how to use emojis. I didn't open the messages right away. My hands were shaking too much, and I didn't want to read them in our home, standing in his office with his breath still on the pillow upstairs. I tucked the phone into my hoodie pocket and left the room, closed the door quietly, and walked out to the backyard, sitting on the edge of the deck like I used to do when the boys were toddlers and I needed 5 minutes alone to cry into my coffee. It was strange how calm I felt, considering the moment should have shattered me. But the truth is, I was already gone. The version of me that would have broken down over this, she died a long time ago, probably right around the time he stopped kissing me on the mouth and started treating me like a maid with benefits. Now I just wanted confirmation. I unlocked the phone, opened the first message. It said, "Did you tell her yet?" The second one read, "You said after her birthday." I didn't open the rest. Back in the house, I pulled up my laptop and added a new line to the Operation Freedom checklist. Check Sabrina's last name. Lawyer may need it. Then I zipped the burner phone into the lining of my suitcase, poured myself a glass of wine, and stared at the ceiling until morning. Mike still had no idea. He thought the gym selfie meant I was trying again. But I wasn't rebuilding us. I was burying the body. There is something sickening about knowing but not knowing, about walking through your own home with a smile that hurts your cheeks while you quietly stitch together the truth, piece by piece. Like some macabre puzzle where the picture is your marriage crumbling and your husband smiling through it all. After finding the burner phone labeled with Sabrina and that stupid little rose, I didn't rage, didn't scream, didn't even cry. I did what I've always done. I researched, I documented, I analyzed. You see, when you spend years editing other people's work, you start to see structure in chaos, rhythm in mess, and inconsistencies in the way people tell their stories. Mike's story had a lot of holes. For instance, 3 weeks ago, he claimed to have worked late on a Thursday. He even said he had a client call go until almost midnight. I nodded, like I always did, and told him I'd saved him leftovers in the fridge. That same night, though, I remembered that he came home smelling like cologne I didn't recognize. Not the usual over-applied aftershave he uses before quarterly meetings, but something sharper, fruitier, the kind of thing you only wear when you're trying to impress someone new. I told myself I was being paranoid, that he could have walked past someone in the elevator or brushed against a coworker's jacket, but now, with the burner phone burning a hole in my suitcase, I knew better. So I pulled up our bank's online statements and dug in. I knew his habits. I'd been managing our bills and budgeting for 15 years. But now I was looking at every purchase with fresh eyes. And there it was. That Thursday night? A gas charge 20 miles west of his office, followed by a dinner bill at a sushi place we'd never been to together. 1 entree, 2 drinks, and a dessert. Then, a ride share to a boutique hotel barely visible on Google Maps, the kind with minimalist websites and no room service. All of it under his name. All of it tied together like a breadcrumb trail leading straight to her. I printed every receipt, highlighted the timestamps, and started building a timeline. Not because I wanted to confront him. I had no interest in dramatic showdowns or emotional confessions. I wasn't going to throw plates or beg for honesty. I needed this paper trail for court. I needed cold, clear proof. If he wanted to cheat, fine, let him. But he was going to do it on the record, and he was going to pay for it. I texted my best friend Nina, who's a therapist but never sounds like one, and told her I'd found something. She came over an hour later with tequila, takeout, and her usual bulldozer energy. Nina doesn't believe in what she calls emotional yoga, the whole breathe through it, find compassion for your husband routine. She said, and I quote, "Burn the whole damn castle down, queen, and salt the damn earth so nothing ever grows there again." She poured us both shots, handed me a plate of lo mein, and started drafting what she called the battle plan. "You already have the apartment, right?" she asked, mouth full of noodles. "And the money's moved?" I nodded. "Then you just need to make sure he doesn't see it coming." The best revenge is when they don't even know they're being played until the credits roll. I couldn't help but laugh. Leave it to Nina to make divorce sound like a Marvel movie. We spent hours that night going over contingencies. What if he begged? What if he threatened? What if the kids got involved too soon? I had answers to all of it because for the first time in years, I was 5 steps ahead of Mike. And God, it felt good. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was moving. I was building something, even if that something was just an escape hatch from the life I'd spent so long pretending to be happy inside. The next day, I went to Ethan's soccer game and cheered louder than usual. I brought orange slices and took pictures and smiled like I wasn't plotting an exit behind every blink. I helped Ryan with his history homework, folded laundry, even cooked dinner before Mike got home. I played the part so well that I half believed it myself. But then, like clockwork, Mike walked in, kissed me on the cheek, just the cheek, never the mouth anymore, and poured himself a drink without even asking how my day was. I watched him from across the kitchen, this man I used to dream about growing old with, and all I could think was, I don't know who you are anymore, and honestly, I don't care. That night, I caught a break. Mike left his phone on the kitchen counter when he went to take a call in the garage. It buzzed once, twice, and then lit up with a preview I couldn't ignore. The message read, "She's getting suspicious." When are you telling her? My heart didn't drop. It didn't even flutter. I just picked up the phone, read the name, Sabrina, and snapped a photo of the message. I didn't need to read the rest. When he came back inside, I was making tea and scrolling through my own messages like nothing had happened. He didn't notice anything was off, didn't even glance at the phone until he picked it up and walked into the living room. I watched him from the doorway, noticed how his thumb hovered for a second before swiping the notification away. His expression didn't change. Cool as ever. Like a man who truly believed he had me where he wanted me. He had no idea the walls were already crumbling around him. No idea that I wasn't planning a confrontation, but a coronation, the moment I'd take back my crown and walk out without ever raising my voice. 2 days. That's all I had left. 2 more days of playing the wife. And then the curtain would fall. It was a strange kind of quiet that morning, the kind of silence you only get when everything is finally in motion and there's no more room left for second guessing, no more space for panic or guilt, just cold. Smooth action like the final stage of a well-executed heist. I woke up early, earlier than even the sun seemed ready for, and stood in the kitchen sipping coffee from the same chipped mug I'd used for years, the one with the faded, "World's Okayest Mom" lettering, and watched the light stretch slowly across the hardwood floor. Mike had already left for work, of course, because it was Friday, and the kids were staying with his mother for the week while they were off school for spring break, which meant this day, this moment, was entirely mine to shape. I'd packed most of what mattered the night before, keeping only what I could carry in the back of my car without raising suspicion. A few boxes waited in the garage, stacked next to the snow tires we never used, and the documents I'd collected, taxes, school forms, the burner phone, the receipts, were all locked inside a fireproof box I'd labeled innocently as photo albums, in thick black marker. I had changed the password on my personal email, closed down shared access to the cloud storage Mike never actually used, and scheduled my cell number to port to a new provider by the end of the week. In other words, I was leaving clean. But I wasn't leaving quietly. I wasn't going to be another woman who disappeared with a post-it note and a suitcase while her husband came home and cried into the leftovers. No, I wanted him to feel it, not with fists or screaming or tears, but with the kind of precision that hits a man where it hurts most, his ego and his wallet. So while the house was still and the coffee was cooling, I printed the divorce papers and placed them neatly on the kitchen island, held down by a small ceramic paperweight shaped like a lighthouse that the boys had made at a school art fair years ago. On top of that, I placed a freshly printed photo of me and Nina clinking margarita glasses at our favorite Mexican place, both of us grinning like we'd just pulled off the scam of the century, which, in some ways, we had. I even wrote a short note on the back in black Sharpie. Cheers to finally giving a damn about myself. Next to the paper sat the lockbox, sealed tight, containing my side of the prenuptial agreement Mike had either forgotten about or assumed I'd lost. The original document had been signed 13 years ago, back when he was still pretending to be generous and I still believed that being in love meant trusting someone with everything. Back then, I didn't think I'd ever need the clause that protected my freelance income or the one that demanded financial transparency. I definitely didn't imagine the irony of using that exact clause to come after the secret investment account I discovered just 1 week ago. The account was listed under a Shell LLC with a name I didn't recognize until I cross-referenced the mailing address with one of his old business cards. It wasn't massive, but it was enough to prove he had been hiding money, enough to legally call it spousal fraud, and enough to give Julia, my lawyer, the leverage she needed to freeze assets before he could drain them out of spite. And just to make sure everything landed with the appropriate weight, Julia herself was waiting in the living room, heels crossed, hair immaculate, with a copy of the restraining order paperwork in her briefcase just in case he decided to come home mad instead of stunned. She'd offered to serve him herself, said she preferred it that way, and I let her. She didn't smile much, but when she looked at me before I walked out the door, she nodded once like we both knew this wasn't just about legal documents, it was about reclaiming something I hadn't even realized I'd lost. My voice, my choices, my future. Before I left, I walked room to room one last time, not crying, not stalling, just taking inventory. The master bedroom still smelled like his cologne and my old perfume fighting for dominance. The boys' room was a mess, a chaotic mix of half-folded laundry and tangled earbuds. The bathroom cabinet still had his shaving kit next to my moisturizer, the same way it had for years, like some unspoken agreement that we were still in this together. But we weren't. Not really. Maybe we hadn't been for a long time. I didn't leave behind clothes or jewelry or sentimental trinkets. I took what mattered and walked out the front door, locking it behind me for what I knew would be the last time. The drive to the apartment was quiet, almost surreal, like the world hadn't caught up to what I'd done. Traffic was light. The air smelled like spring was thinking about showing up. It didn't feel like fleeing. It felt like arriving. Later that afternoon, Mike came home, just like I'd planned. He pulled into the driveway expecting dinner, a clean house, maybe even a grateful wife ready to apologize for being so emotional lately. Instead, he found silence, an empty home, and Julia sitting in the living room with a folder on her lap and a look on her face that could chill granite. He tried to act confused at first, played dumb like maybe this was some misunderstanding, like maybe I was off running errands and the lawyer was just waiting by accident. But Julia, bless her cold-blooded soul, stood up, handed him the envelope, and said, in the clearest voice you can imagine, Mr. Hanley, you've officially been served. Your wife has filed for divorce under grounds of financial concealment, fraud, and emotional neglect. He didn't speak right away. Just stood there blinking like someone had swapped out all the furniture while he was at work. Then she added, with the perfect amount of venom, and you might want to talk to Sabrina before she finds out you never actually filed your divorce with her either. That's right. Because while I was digging, I found something else, an old marriage license, buried in our shared Dropbox folder, from before he and I met. A license that had never been annulled, never been officially dissolved, never mentioned once in our 16 years together. So while he stood there, holding the papers with shaking hands, wondering which lie had finally undone him, I was already downtown, unpacking dishes into my new cabinets, cracking open a bottle of red wine, and calling Nina to celebrate. Because in the end, I didn't just leave him. I exposed him. And I did it with style. The apartment was smaller than what I'd grown used to, the kind of space that makes you walk sideways between the couch and the coffee table and hang pans on the wall because there's not a drawer deep enough to hold them, but it was mine. And that fact alone made every cramped corner feel like a palace. The first morning I woke up there, alone and untouched, I stood barefoot on the cold tile and just breathed, deeply and fully, for the first time in what felt like years. There were no sounds of someone slamming drawers in the bathroom, no careless footsteps across the hardwood, no voice asking what was for breakfast without once asking how I'd slept. It was a quiet I had to get used to, if I'm being honest. At first it was almost eerie, like I was waiting for someone to fill the silence with chaos or clatter or complaints. But no one came. And the silence, as it turns out, wasn't empty, it was peaceful. It was the kind of peace that wraps around you slowly, like warm water in a bath you didn't know your body needed. I filled the space with things that mattered. A new rug in a shade of green that Mike would have hated. A bookshelf I built myself, crooked as hell but sturdy. A framed photo of the boys on the nightstand. And my laptop, of course, my lifeline to the life I was rebuilding, one paragraph at a time. Within a week of settling in, I reached out to an old contact in publishing who, by some miracle of timing and grace, offered me a part-time freelance editing contract on a memoir by a debut author with a rough draft full of heart and no sense of grammar. It was the perfect distraction, the kind of work that felt like therapy without the awkward couches and overpriced copays. Meanwhile, Mike was falling apart in slow motion, and from what I gathered through the occasional back channel and the not-so-subtle text messages from mutual acquaintances, he wasn't handling the unraveling with much dignity. He called Ethan crying one night, which threw my son into such a spiral that I had to drive over just to sit with him and explain, in the calmest voice I could manage, that grown men sometimes cry not because they're sorry, but because they're scared of facing consequences they never believed would come. He called me once too, late at night, slurring his words, asking if we could just talk. I let it ring until voicemail picked up, then deleted the message before listening to the whole thing. Whatever he had to say, it was years too late and miles off target. 2 days later, he showed up at my building, shirt wrinkled, tie half undone, breath soaked in whiskey and regret. He knocked for 5 minutes straight, muttering my name like it was still his to use, but I never opened the door. I stood in the kitchen with a glass of water in one hand and the other braced on the counter, listening to the sound of the man I used to love begging the air like it could forgive him. He eventually left, stumbling back to his car, probably to find another bottle or another lie to crawl into. I waited 10 minutes, then sat at my little desk, typed up a note, and dropped it in the mailbox the next morning along with a shiny gym brochure I picked up from the same flex house where it all started. On the front of the note, in my neatest handwriting, I wrote only this: "You should start caring again." According to Nina, who still calls me twice a week, mostly to say things like, "You're a badass," and "Hope he's bald by Christmas," Sabrina dumped him the second she found out he'd never finalized his previous divorce. Apparently, the look on her face when she learned she'd been dating a still technically married man was something out of a courtroom drama. She walked out, took the jewelry, and probably the cat too, if I know women like her, and blocked him on everything. Last I heard, he was staying in some rented condo that smelled like mildew and stale hope. The kids are adjusting better than I expected, especially Ethan, who's old enough to understand more than he should, but still young enough to want to believe the best in people. Ryan asks fewer questions now, though sometimes when I pick him up from school, he still looks toward our old street like he's expecting to see Mike standing there. I don't know what kind of relationship they'll end up having, but I do know I'll never lie to them again, not even the little lies I told to keep peace in a house where love had long since died. Most nights, I pour myself a glass of wine and read. Some nights I don't even turn the TV on. I've found that stillness doesn't scare me the way it used to. In fact, it's in that stillness that I've started finding myself again, the version of me that used to write poetry at midnight, that danced in the kitchen for no reason, that wore lipstick just because it made her feel like she mattered. There's one thing, though, something I haven't told anyone yet, not even Nina. During the chaos of everything, I kept working on a manuscript I'd been editing quietly, one the publisher hadn't even assigned to me, one I found buried deep in a submission pile and pulled out because something in the opening line felt familiar. The author hadn't included a name, just initials, but the writing, it was raw, almost too raw. I worked on it in bits and pieces, never asking questions, just shaping the story like I was handling someone else's open wound. Tonight, I opened the file again, the final draft waiting on my desktop. I scrolled to the title page, the one I'd seen a dozen times before, but had never really looked at, not with fresh eyes. And there it was, printed in bold across the top, The Man Who Forgot His Wife's Birthday. I stared at it for a long time, the cursor blinking beneath the title like it was daring me to ask the question I didn't want to answer. I closed the laptop slowly, leaned back in my chair, and let the silence hold me again. Maybe this was revenge. Maybe it was rebirth. Maybe the line between the two had always been thinner than I realized. Either way, I had finally written the last sentence. And for the first time in years, the ending belonged to me.